3 million Americans. My question to you is, if an individual is living in the United States of America without documents and that is his only offense, should that person be deported?
No.
Depending if they committed a major crime, they should be deported. And the president was left in his... President Obama, I think, did a heck of a job. To compare him to what this guy's doing is absolutely, I find, close to immoral. But the fact is that, look, we should not be locking people up. We should be making sure we change the circumstance, as we did, why they would leave in the first place. And those who come seeking asylum, we should immediately have the capacity to absorb them, keep them safe until they can be heard.
A 15-second, if you could, if you wish to answer. Should someone who is here without documents, and that is his only offense, should that person be deported?
That person should not be the focus of deportation. We should fundamentally change the way we deal with things.
Senator,
I want
to suggest that I agree with a lot of what Kamala just said. And that is, on day one, we take out our executive order pen and we rescind every damn thing on this issue that Trump has done. Number two, picking up on the point that Joe made, we got to look at the root causes. And you have a situation where Honduras, among other things, is a failing state, massive corruption. You got gangs who are telling families that if a 10-year-old does not join that gang, that family is going to be killed. What we have got to do on day one is invite the presidents and the leadership of Central America and Mexico together. This is a hemispheric problem that we have got to address.
Congressman Swalwell, what do you do?
Day one?
No. If someone is here without documents and that is their only offense, is that person to be deported?
No. That person can be a part of this great American experience. That person can contribute. My congressional district is one of the most diverse in America, and we see the benefits when people contribute and they become a part of the community and they're not in the shadow economy. Day one for me, families are reunited. This president, though, for immigrants, there's nothing he will not do to separate a family, cage a child, or erase their existence by weaponizing the census. And there is nothing that we cannot do in the courts and that I will not do as president to reverse that and to make sure that families always belong together.
Senator Harris.
Well, thank you. I will say, no, absolutely not. They should not be deported. And I actually, this was one of the very few issues with which I disagreed with the administration, with whom I otherwise had a great relationship and a great deal of respect. But on the secure communities issue, I was Attorney General of California. I led the second largest Department of Justice in the United States, second only to the United States Department of Justice in a state of 40 million people. And on this issue, I disagreed with my president because the policy was to allow deportation of people who, by ICE's own definition, were non-criminals. So as Attorney General and the Chief Law Officer of the state of California, I issued a directive to the sheriffs of my state that they did not have to comply with detainers and instead should make decisions based on the best interest of public safety of their community. Because what I saw, and I was tracking it every day, I was tracking it and saw that parents, people who had not committed a crime, even by ICE's own definition, were being deported. But I have to add a point here. The problem with this kind of policy, and I know it as a prosecutor, Senator, I want a rape victim to be able to run in the middle of the street and wave down a police officer and report the crime against her. I want anybody who has been the victim of any real crime to be able to do that and not be afraid that if they do that, they will be deported because the abuser will tell them it is they who is the criminal. It is wrong. It is wrong.
We're going to turn to the issue of trade now, if we can. Last night, we asked the candidates on this stage to name the greatest geopolitical threat facing the U.S. 4 of them mention China. U.S. businesses say China steals our intellectual property, and party leaders on both sides accuse China of manipulating their currency to keep the cost of goods artificially low. I'll ask this to Senator Bennett to start off with. How would you stand up to China?
I think that, first of all, the biggest threat to our national security right now is Russia, not China. And second, on China, we've got competition because of what they've done with our elections. In China, I think the president's been right to push back on China, but has done it in completely the wrong way. We should mobilize the entire rest of the world, who all have a shared interest in pushing back on China's mercantilist trade policies, and I think we can do that. I'd like to answer the other question before this as well.
You have the time?
When I see these kids at the border, I see my mom because I know she sees herself, because she was separated from her parents for years during the Holocaust in Poland. And for Donald Trump to be doing what he's doing to children and their families at the borders, I say this as somebody who wrote the immigration bill in 2013 that created a pathway to citizenship for 11 million people in this country, that had the most progressive DREAM Act that's ever been conceived, much less passed. It got 68 votes in the Senate, that had $46 billion of border security in it, that was sophisticated 21st century border security, not a medieval wall. And the president has turned the border of the United States into a symbol of nativist hostility that the whole world is looking at, when what we should be represented by is the Statue of Liberty, which has brought my parents to this country to begin with. We need to make a change.
Mr. Yang, let me bring you in on this, on the issue of China. You've expressed a lot of concerns about technology and taking jobs. Are you worried about China? And if so, how would you stand up against it?
Well, I just want to agree that I think Russia is our greatest geopolitical threat, because they've been hacking our democracy successfully, and they've been laughing their asses off about it for the last couple of years. So we should focus on that before we start worrying about other threats. Now, China, they do pirate our intellectual property. It's a massive problem. But the tariffs and the trade war are just punishing businesses and producers and workers on both sides. I met with a farmer in Iowa who said he spent 6 years building up a buying relationship in China that's now disappeared and gone forever. And the beneficiaries have not been American workers or people in China. It's been Southeast Asia and other producers that have then stepped into the void. So we need to crack down on Chinese malfeasance in the trade relationship, but the tariffs and the trade war are the wrong way to go.
All right, Mayor Buttigieg, how would you stand up against China?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, we've got to recognize that the China challenge really is a serious one. This is not something to dismiss or wave away. And if you look at what China is doing, they're using technology for the perfection of dictatorship. But their fundamental economic model isn't going to change because of some tariffs. I live in the industrial Midwest. Folks who aren't in the shadow of a factory are somewhere near a soy field where I live. And manufacturers, and especially soy farmers, are hurting. Tariffs are taxes. And Americans are going to pay on average $800 more a year because of these tariffs. Meanwhile, China is investing so that they could soon be able to run circles around us in artificial intelligence. And this president is fixated on the China relationship as if all that mattered was the export balance on dishwashers. We've got a much bigger issue on our hands, but at a moment when their authoritarian model is being held up as an alternative to ours because ours looks so chaotic compared to theirs right now because of our internal divisions. The biggest thing we've got to do is invest in our own domestic competitiveness. If we disinvest in our own infrastructure, education, we are never going to be able to compete. And if we really want to be an alternative, a democratic alternative, we actually have to demonstrate that we care about democratic values at home and around the world.
We've got a good debate so far. We're going to take a quick break here, candidates. When we come back, the questioning continues with our colleagues. Chuck Todd, Rachel Maddow will be here. Much more with our candidates straight ahead.
Welcome back to the Democratic presidential debate from the Arch Center in Miami.
As we continue the questioning, we want to bring in more members of our team.
So let's turn it over to Chuck Todd and Rachel Maddow.
Well, Rachel, I had a dream that we've done this before.
No.
This is definitely the first time. Definitely first time. Thank you, Lester, Savannah, and Jose. Let's quickly recap the rules one more time. 20 candidates qualified for this first debate. We've heard from 10 of them from last night. We're hearing from 10 more tonight. Breakdown for each night was selected at random. Candidates will have 60 seconds to answer direct questions, 30 seconds for follow-ups if necessary.
Because of this large field of candidates, not every person will be able to comment on everything, but the less audience reaction there is, the more time they will all get. Over the course of the next hour, we will hear from all of these candidates, but we are going to begin this hour with Mayor Buttigieg. In the last 5 years, civil rights activists in our country have led a national debate over race and the criminal justice system. Your community of South Bend, Indiana, has recently been in uproar over an officer-involved shooting. The police force in South Bend is now 6% black in a city that is 26% black. Why has that not improved over your 2 terms as mayor?
Because I couldn't get it done. My community is in anguish right now because of an officer-involved shooting. A black man, Eric Logan, killed by a white officer. And I'm not allowed to take sides until the investigation comes back. The officer said he was attacked with a knife, but he didn't have his body camera on. It's a mess, and we're hurting. And I could walk you through all of the things that we have done as a community, all of the steps that we took from bias training to de-escalation, but it didn't save the life of Eric Logan. And when I look into his mother's eyes, I have to face the fact that nothing that I say will bring him back. This is an issue that is facing our community and so many communities around the country. And until we move policing out from the shadow of systemic racism, whatever this particular incident teaches us, we will be left with the bigger problem of the fact that there's a wall of mistrust put up one racist act at a time, not just from what's happened in the past, but from what's happening around the country in the present. It threatens the well-being of every community. And I am determined to bring about a day when a white person driving a vehicle and a black person driving a vehicle, when they see a police officer approaching, feels the exact same thing, a feeling not of fear, but of safety. I am determined to bring that day about.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
If I could ask one question, just because I think...
Governor, I'll give you 30 seconds.
I think that the question they're asking in South Bend, I think in cities across the country, is why has it taken so long? We had a shooting when I first became mayor 10 years before Ferguson, and the community came together and we created an Office of the Independent Monitor, a Civilian Oversight Commission. We diversified the police force in 2 years. We actually did de-escalation training. I think the real question that America should be asking is why 5 years after Ferguson, every city doesn't have this level of police accountability.
Governor Hickenlooper, thank you.
I got to respond to that. Look, we've taken so many steps toward police accountability that the FOP just denounced me for too much accountability. We're obviously not there yet. And I accept responsibility for that because I'm in charge.
Policy, you should fire the chief.
So under Indiana law, this will be investigated, and there will be accountability for the officer involved.
But you're the mayor. You should fire the chief if that's the policy and someone died.
All of these issues are extremely important, but there are specifics, there are symptoms, and the underlying cause has to do with deep, deep, deep realms of racial injustice, both in our criminal justice system and in our economic system. And the Democratic Party should be on the side of reparations for slavery for this very reason. I do not believe that the average American is a racist, but the average American is woefully undereducated about the history of race in the United States.
Ms. Williamson, thank you very much.
Vice President Biden, we're going to get to you. Hang on, we're going to get to
you. Stage, I would like to speak on the issue of race.
Senator Harris, if I could preface this, we will give you 30 seconds of this. We're going to come back to you on this again in just a moment. Go for 30 seconds.
Okay. So on the issue of race, I couldn't agree more that this is an issue that is still not being talked about truthfully and honestly. There is not a black man I know, be he a relative, a friend, or a coworker, who has not been the subject of some form of profiling or discrimination. Growing up, my sister and I had to deal with the neighbor who told us her parents couldn't play with us because we were black. And I will say also that in this campaign, we've also heard, and I'm going to now direct this at Vice President Biden, I do not believe you are a racist. And I agree with you when you commit yourself to the importance of finding common ground. But I also believe, and it's personal, and I was actually it was hurtful to hear you talk about the reputations of 2 United States senators who built their reputations and career on the segregation of race in this country. And it was not only that, but you also worked with them to oppose busing. And, there was a little girl in California who was part of the 2nd class to integrate her public schools. and she was bused to school every day. And that little girl was me. So I will tell you that on this subject, it cannot be an intellectual debate among Democrats. We have to take it seriously. We have to act swiftly. As Attorney General of California, I was very proud to put in place a requirement that all my special agents would wear body cameras and keep those cameras on.
Senator Harris, thank you. Vice President Biden, you have been invoked. We are going to give you a chance to respond. Vice President Biden.
Mischaracterization of my position across the board. I did not praise racist. That is not true. Number one. Number two, if we want to have this campaign litigated on who supports civil rights and whether I did or not, I'm happy to do that. I was a public defender. I didn't become a prosecutor. I came out and I left a good law firm to become a public defender when in fact my city was in flames because of the assassination of Dr. King. Number one. Number two, as the Vice President of the United States, I work with a man who, in fact, we worked very hard to see to it we dealt with these issues in a major, major way. The fact is that in terms of busing, the busing, you would have been able to go to school the same exact way because it was a local decision made by your city council. That's fine. That's one of the things I argued for, that we should be breaking down these lines. But so the bottom line here is, look, everything I've done in my career, I ran because of civil rights. I continue to think we have to make fundamental changes in civil rights. And those civil rights, by the way, include not just only African Americans, but the LGBT community.
But Vice President Biden, do you agree today that you were wrong to oppose busing in America then?
No,
do you agree?
I did not oppose busing in America. What I opposed is busing ordered by the Department of Education. That's what I opposed.
Well, there was a failure of states to integrate public schools in America. I was part of the second class to integrate Berkeley, California public schools almost 2 decades after Brown v. Board of Education.
Because your city council made that decision. It was a local decision.
So that's where the federal government must step in. That's why we have the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act. That's why we need to pass the Equality Act. That's why we need to pass the ERA, because there are moments in history where states fail to preserve the civil rights of all people.
I have supported the ERA from the very beginning when I ran
Vice President Biden, 30 seconds, because I want to bring other people into this.
I supported the ERA from the very beginning. I'm the guy that extended the Voting Rights Act for 25 years. We got to the place where we got 98 out of 98 votes in the United States Senate doing it. I've also argued very strongly that we, in fact, deal with the notion of denying people access to the ballot box. I agree that everybody, once they, in fact, they should. Anyway, my time's up. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Vice President.
All of these things have
Senator Sanders, I want to go to you on this. You said on the day you launched your campaign that voters should focus on what people stand for, not a candidate's race or age or sexual orientation. Many Democrats are very excited by the diversity of this field on this stage and on last night's stage, and the perspective that diversity brings to this contest and to these issues. Are you telling Democratic voters that diversity shouldn't matter when they make this decision?
No, absolutely not. Unlike the Republican Party, we encourage diversity. We believe in diversity. That's what America is about. But in addition to diversity, in terms of having more women, more people from the LGBT community, we also have to do something else. And that is, we have to ask ourselves a simple question. And that, how come today the worker in the middle of our economy is making no more money than he or she made 45 years ago, and that in the last 30 years, the top 1% has seen a $21 trillion increase in their wealth? We need a party that is diverse, but we need a party that has the guts to stand up to the powerful special interests who have so much power over the economic and political life of this country.
Senator Gillibrand, I want to give you 30 seconds on this.
Well, first of all, where Bernie left off,
We've heard a lot of good ideas on this stage tonight and a lot of plans, but the truth is, until you go to the root of the corruption, the money in politics, the fact that Washington is run by the special interests, you are never going to solve any of these problems. I have the most comprehensive approach that experts agree is the most transformative plan to actually take on political corruption, to get money out of politics through publicly funded elections, to have clean elections. If we do that and get money out of politics, we can guarantee health care as a right, not a privilege. We can deal with institutional racism. We can take on income inequality, and we can take on the corporate corruption that runs Washington.
The first constitutional amendment to do that was introduced by me when I was a young senator.
Thank you, Vice President. We want to shift topics here. Senator Bennett, the next question is for you. On the issue of partisan gridlock, President Obama promised in 2012 that after his reelection, Republicans would want to work with Democrats. Fever would break. That did not happen. Now, Vice President Biden is saying the same thing, that if he is elected in 2020, both parties will want to work together. Should voters believe that somehow if there's a Democratic president in 2021, that gridlock is going to magically disappear?
Gridlock will not magically disappear as long as Mitch McConnell is there, first. Second, that's why it is so important for us to win not just the presidency, to have somebody that can run in all 50 states, but to win the Senate as well. And that's why we have to propose policies that can be supported, like Medicare Act, so that we can build a broad coalition of Americans to overcome broken Washington, D.C. I agree with what Senator Gillibrand was saying. I share a lot of her views. We need to end gerrymandering in Washington. We need to end political gerrymandering in Washington. The court today said they couldn't do anything about it. We need to overturn Citizens United. The court was the one that gave us Citizens United. And the attack on voting rights in Shelby versus Holder is something we need to deal with. All of those things has happened since Vice President Biden was in the Senate. And we face structural problems that we have to overcome with a broad coalition. It's the only way we can do it. We need to root out the corruption in Washington, expand people's right to get to the polls, and I think then we can succeed.
Vice President Biden, 30 seconds. It does sound as if you haven't seen what's been happening in the United States Senate over the last 12 years. It didn't happen. Why?
I have seen what happened just since we were vice president. We needed 3 votes to pass an $800 billion recovery act that kept us from going into depression. I got 3 votes changed. We needed to be able to keep the government from shutting down and going bankrupt. I got Mitch McConnell to raise taxes $600 billion by raising the top rate. And as recently as after President got elected, I was able to put together a coalition of the Cures Act that billions of dollars go into cancer research. Bipartisan, but sometimes you can't do that. Sometimes you just have to go out and beat them. I went into 20 states, over 60 candidates, and guess what? We beat them. We won back the Senate.
Thank you.
Chuck,
thank you,
the
Mr.
problem with what the Vice President...
Yeah, 30 seconds. Go ahead.
Sometimes you do have to beat him, but the deal that he talked about with Mitch McConnell was a complete victory for the Tea Party. It extended the Bush tax cuts permanently. The Democratic Party had been running against that for 10 years. We lost that economic argument because that deal extended almost all those Bush tax cuts permanently and put in place the mindless cuts that we still are dealing with today that are called the sequester. That was a great deal for Mitch McConnell. It was a terrible deal for America.
Thank you, Senator Bennett.
From the Republicans.
Go ahead, 30 seconds.
The reason why the Trump tax cut had to be passed is because they had to pay back their donors. You heard it. They actually said those words. So the corruption in Washington is real, and it is something that makes every one of the plans we've heard about over the last several months impossible. And I have the most comprehensive approach to do it with clean elections, publicly funded elections. So we restore the power of our democracy into the hands of the voters, not into the Koch brothers. We were talking about issues. Imagine, we're in Florida, imagine the Parkland kids having as much power in our democracy as the Koch brothers or the NRA. Imagine their voices carrying farther and wider than anyone else because their voice is needed.
Senator Gillibrand, I'm trying to get everybody in here.
As president, it's the first thing I'm going to do because nothing else is possible, whether it's education or healthcare or ending institutional racism.
Thank you very much.
Senator Sanders, I'd like to put a different question to you. Roe versus Wade has been the law of the land since 1973. Now that there is a conservative majority on the Supreme Court, several Republican-controlled states have passed laws to severely restrict or even ban abortion. One of those laws could very well make it to the Supreme Court during your presidency, if you're elected president. What is your plan if Roe is struck down in the court while you're president?
Well, my plan is somebody who believes, for a start, that a woman's right to control her own body is a constitutional right, that government and politicians should not infringe on that right. We will do everything we can to defend our Roe versus Wade. Second of all, let me make a promise here. You ask about litmus test. My litmus test is I will never nominate any justice to the Supreme Court unless that justice is 100% clear he or she will defend Roe v. Wade. Third of all, I do not believe in packing the court. We got a terrible 5-4 majority conservative court right now. But I do believe that constitutionally we have the power to rotate judges to other courts. And that brings in new blood into the Supreme Court and a majority, I hope, that will understand that a woman has the right to control her own body and that corporations cannot run the United States of America.
Hold on, I'm going to give you 10 additional seconds because the question is, what if the court has already overturned Roe and Roe is gone? All of the things you just described would be to try to preserve Roe. If Roe is gone, what could you do as president to preserve abortion rights?
Well, first of all, let me tell you this. It didn't come up here, but let's face this. Medicare for all guarantees every woman in this country the right to have an abortion if she wants it.
Thank you, Senator.
And can I just address this for a second? And I want to talk directly to America's women and to the men who love them. Women's reproductive rights are under assault by President Trump and the Republican Party. 30 states are trying to overturn Roe v. Wade right now. And it is mind-boggling to me that we are debating this on this stage in 2019 among Democrats, whether women should have access to reproductive rights. I think we have to stop playing defense and start playing offense. But let me tell you one thing about politics, because it goes to the corruption and the deal-making. When the door is closed and the negotiations are made, there are conversations about women's rights, and compromises have been made on our backs. That's how we got to Hyde. That's how the Hyde Amendment was created, a compromise by leaders of both parties. Then we have the ACA. During the ACA negotiation, I had to fight like heck with other women to make sure that contraception wasn't sold down the river or abortion services. And so what we need to know is, imagine this one question. When we beat President Trump, and Mitch McConnell walks into the Oval Office, God forbid, to do negotiations, who do you want, when that door closes, to be sitting behind that desk to fight for women's rights? I have been the fiercest advocate for women's reproductive freedom for over a decade. And I promise you, as president, when that door closes, I will guarantee women's reproductive freedom no matter what.
Thank you. We're moving to climate. We're moving to climate, guys. Senator Harris, I'm addressing you first on this. You live in a state that has been hit by drought, wildfires, flooding. Climate change is a major concern for voters in your state. It's pretty obvious. Obviously, this state as well. Last night, voters heard many of the candidates weigh in on their proposals. Explain specifically what yours is.
Well, first of all, I don't even call it climate change. It's a climate crisis. It represents an existential threat to us as a species. And the fact that we have a president of the United States who has embraced science fiction over science fact will be to our collective peril. I visited, while the embers were smoldering, the wildfires in California. I spoke with firefighters who were in the midst of fighting a fire while their own homes were burning. And on this issue, it is a critical issue that is about what we must do to confront what is immediate and before us right now. That is why I support a Green New Deal. It is why I believe on day one, and as president, will re-enter us in the Paris Agreement, because we have to take these issues seriously. And frankly, we have a president of the United States. We talked about, you asked before, what is the greatest national security threat to the United States? It's Donald Trump. And I'm going to tell you why. And I'm going to tell you why. Because I agree, climate change represents an existential threat. He denies the science. You want to talk about North Korea, real threat in terms of nuclear arsenal, but what does he do? He embraces Kim Jong-un, a dictator for the sake of a photo op. Putin, you want to talk about
Senator
Russia?
Harris, we're going to
he takes the word of the Russian president over the word of the American intelligence community when it comes to a threat to our democracy and our elections.
Thank you, Senator Harris.
These are the issues that are before us, Chuck.
I hear you. Thank you, Senator Harris. Mayor Buttigieg, in your climate plan, if you're elected president in your first term, how is this going to help farmers impacted by climate change in the Midwest?
Well, the reality is we need to begin adapting right away, but we also can't skip a beat on preventing climate change from getting even worse. It's why we need aggressive and ambitious measures. It's why we need to do a carbon tax and dividend. But I would propose we do it in a way that is rebated out to the American people in a progressive fashion so that most Americans are made more than whole. This isn't theoretical for us in South Bend either. Parts of California on fire. Right here in Florida, they're talking about sea level rise. Well, in Indiana, I had to activate the Emergency Operations Center of our city twice in less than 2 years. The first time was a 1,000-year flood, and the next time was a 500-year flood. This is not just happening on the Arctic ice caps. This is happening in the middle of the country. And we've got to be dramatically more aggressive moving forward. Now, here's what very few people talk about. First of all, rural America can be part of the solution instead of being told they're part of the problem. With the right kind of soil management and other kind of investments, rural America could be a huge part of how we get this done. And secondly, we've got to look to the leadership of local communities. You know, those networks of mayors and cities from around the world who have come together, not even waiting for our national governments to catch up. We should have a Pittsburgh summit where we bring them together as well as rejoining the Paris.
Thank you, Mayor Buttigieg.
I want to bring Governor Hickenlooper into this for a moment. Governor, you have said that oil and gas companies should be a part of the solution on climate change. Lots of your colleagues on stage tonight have talked about moving away from fossil fuels entirely. Can oil and gas companies be real partners in this fight?
Well, I share the sense of urgency. I'm a scientist, so I recognize that we're within 10 or 12 years of actually, suffering irreversible damage. But guaranteeing everybody a government job is not going to get us there. Socialism, and in that sense, is not the solution. We have to look at what really will make a difference. In Colorado, we're closing a couple of coal plants, replacing them with wind, solar, and batteries, and the monthly bills go down. We're building a network for electric vehicles. We are working with the oil and gas industry, and we created the first methane regulations in the country. Methane is 25 times worse than CO2. And then we've got to get to that last part. I mean, the industrial, heavy industry, we haven't seen the plans yet. If you look at the real problem, CO2, the worst polluters in CO2 is China, is the United States, and then it's concrete and its exhalation. And beyond that, I think we've got to recognize that only by bringing people together, businesses, nonprofits, and we can't demonize every business. We've got to bring them together to be part of this thing, because ultimately, if we're not able to do that, we will be doomed to failure. We have no way of doing this without bringing everyone together.
Thank you. Vice President Biden, on the issue of how you do this, Democrats are arguing robustly among themselves about what's the best way to tackle climate change. But if we're honest, many Republicans, including the president, are still not sure if they believe it is even a serious problem. So, are there significant ways you can cut carbon emissions if you have to do it with no support from Congress?
The answer is yes. Number one, in our administration, we built the largest wind farm in the world, the largest solar energy facility in the world. We drove down the competitive price of both of those renewable sources. I would immediately insist that we, in fact, build 500,000 recharging stations throughout the United States of America, working with governors, mayors, and others, so that we can go to a full electric vehicle future by the year 2020, or by the year 2030. I would make sure that we invested $400 million in new science and technology to be the exporter, not only of the green economy, but economy that can create millions of jobs. But I would immediately join the Paris Climate Accord. I would up the ante in that accord, which it calls for, because we make up 15% of the problem. 85% of the world makes up the rest. And so we have to have someone who knows how to corral the rest of the world, bring them together, and get something done like we did in our administration.
Senator Sanders, I want to give you 30 seconds to follow up, and I'm going to hold you to 30.
Look, the old ways are no longer relevant. The scientists tell us we have 12 years before there is irreparable damage to this planet. This is a global issue. What the President of the United States should do is not deny the reality of climate change, but tell the rest of the world that instead of spending $1.5 trillion on weapons of destruction, let us get together for the common enemy, and that is to transform the world's energy system away from fossil fuel to energy efficiency and sustainable energy. The future of the planet rests on us doing that.
Before we go, hang on.
Before we leave this topic.
Here's the solution. Pass the torch. Pass the torch to the generation that's going to feel the effects of climate change. Pass the torch to the generation that's inventive enough.
Thank you both.
Before we leave this topic, here's something you will all want to weigh in on. Hold on one moment. Hold one moment.
Just trust us on this.
Somebody has a younger body doesn't mean you don't have old ideas.
No, we didn't do
it. John Kennedy did not say, I have a plan to get a man to the moon, and so we're going to do it, and I think we can all work together, and maybe we can get a man on the moon. And John Kennedy said, by the end of this decade, we are going to put a man on the moon. Because John Kennedy was back in the day when politics included the people, and included imagination, and included great dreams, and included great plans. And I have had a career not making the political plans, but I have had a career harnessing the inspiration and the motivation and the excitement of people, masses of people. When we know that when we say we are going to turn from a dirty economy to a clean economy, we're going to have a Green New Deal, we're going to create millions of jobs, we're going to do this within the next 12 years, because I'm not interested in just winning the next election. We are interested in our grandchildren.
All right, we're going to sneak in a break in a minute, but before we go, I'm going to go down the line here, and I'm asking you, please, for 1 or 2 words only. All right? Please.
Really?
President Obama in his first year wanted to address both healthcare and climate. And he could only get one signature issue accomplished. It was obviously healthcare. He didn't get to do climate change. You may only get one shot, and your first issue that you're going to push, you get one shot that it may be the only thing you get passed. What is that first issue for your presidency? Eric Swalwell, you're first.
For Parkland, for Orlando, for every community affected by gun violence, ending gun violence.
Senator Bennett.
Climate change and the lack of economic mobility Bernie talks about.
Senator Gillibrand.
Passing a family bill of rights that includes a national paid leave plan, universal pre-K, affordable daycare, and making sure that women and families can thrive in the workplace no matter who they are.
Oh, I like that.
was pretty. Senator
I'm
Harris.
At it then. So passing a middle class and working families tax cut,
That's one.
DACA, guns.
Okay. I'm giving you credit for the first thing you said, the tax cut. I got you. Senator Sanders, first thing.
The premise that there's only 1 or 2 issues out there. This
I'm not saying there's
country
1 or
faces
2.
enormous crises.
Senator
we
Sanders.
need a political revolution. People have got to stand up and take on the special interest. We can transform this country.
Fine. Vice President Biden, your first issue, Mr. Vice President.
I think you're so underestimating what Barack Obama did. He's the first man to bring together the entire world, 196 nations, to commit to deal with climate change immediately. So I don't buy that. But the first thing I would do is make sure that we defeat Donald Trump. Period.
Mayor Buttigieg, your first priority, your first issue as president that you were going to block and tackle.
We've got to fix our democracy before it's too late. Get that right. Climate, immigration, taxes, and every other issue gets better.
Mr. Yang.
I would pass a $1,000 freedom dividend for every American adult starting at age 18, which would speed us up on climate change, because if you get the boot off of people's throats, they'll focus on climate change much more clearly.
Governor Hickenlooper?
I would do a collaborative approach to climate change, and I would pronounce it well before the election to make sure we don't re-elect the worst president in American history.
And Ms. Williamson
My
with the last
first call
word.
is to Prime Minister of New Zealand, who said that her goal is to make New Zealand the place where it's the best place in the world for a child to grow up. And I will tell her girlfriend you are so on, because the United States of America is going to be the best place in the world for a child to grow up.
Ms. Williamson,
we are going to have...
You guys were close with the short, at least it was shorter responses.
Not at all.
All right. C-.
We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with these candidates right after this. back to the Democratic candidates debate in Miami. We're going to continue the questioning now with Lester in the audience. We are in a second are going to have a question from Lester in the audience, but that was just a fake out.
Let's go. We're going to go to the issue of guns and
Congressman Swalwell. Among this field of candidates, you have a unique position on gun reform. You're proposing that the government should buy back every assault weapon in America, and it should be mandatory. How do you envision that working, especially in states where gun rights are a strong flashpoint?
Keep your pistols, keep your rifles, keep your shotguns, but we can take the most dangerous weapons from the most dangerous people. We have the NRA on the ropes because of the moms, because of the Brady Group, because of Giffords, because of March for Our Lives. But I'm the only candidate on this stage calling for a ban and buyback of every single assault weapon in America. I've seen the plans of the other candidates here. They would all leave 15 million assault weapons in our communities. They wouldn't do a single thing to save a single life in Parkland. I'll approach this issue as a prosecutor. I'll approach it as the only person on this stage who has voted and passed background checks, but also as a parent of a generation who sends our children to school where we look at what they're wearing so we can remember it in case we have to identify them later. A generation who has seen thousands of black children killed in our streets, and a generation who goes to the theater and we actually look where the fire exits are. We don't have to live this way. We must be a country who loves our children more than we love our guns.
Senator Sanders, a Vermont newspaper recently released portions of an interview you gave in 2013 in which you said, quote, "My own view on guns is everything being equal, states should make those decisions."
No.
Has your thinking changed since then? Do you now think there's a federal role to play?
That's a mischaracterization of my thinking.
It's a
Look,
quote of
we
you.
have a gun crisis right now. 40,000 people a year are getting killed. In 1988, Rachel, when it wasn't popular, I ran on a platform of banning assault weapons, and in fact lost that race for Congress. I have a D- voting record from the NRA. And I believe that what we need is comprehensive gun legislation that, among other things, provides universal background. We end the gun show loophole. We end the straw man provision. And I believed in 1988, and I believe today.
Why would you
that
leave
assault
weapons
are weapons from the military, and that they should not be on the streets of America.
Your plan leaves them on the streets. You leave 15 million on the streets.
We banned the sale, and
Will you buy them
distribution, and that's what I believe for many years.
Will you buy them back?
If people want to buy, if the government wants to do that, and people want to
You're going to be the government.
Yes.
Will you buy them back?
Yes.
Senator Harris, we're going to give you 30 seconds.
Thank you. I think your idea is a great one, Congressman Swalwell, and I will say that there are a lot of great ideas. The problem is Congress has not had the courage to act, which is why when elected President of the United States, I will give the United States Congress 100 days to pull their act together, bring all these good ideas together, and put a bill on my desk for signature. And if they do not, I will take executive action, and I will put in place the most comprehensive background check policy we've had. I will require the ATF to take the licenses of gun dealers who violate the law, and I will ban by executive order the importation of assault weapons. Because I'm going to tell you, as a prosecutor, I have seen more autopsy photographs than I care to tell you. I have hugged more mothers who are the mothers of homicide victims, and I have attended more police officer funerals. It is enough. It is enough. There have been plenty of good ideas from members of the United States Congress. There's been no action. As president, I will take action.
Mayor Buttigieg, I want to bring you in on this, sir. A lot of discussion about assault rifles that are often shorthanded as military-style weapons. You are the only person on this stage tonight with military experience as a veteran of the Afghanistan war. Will military families, does that inform your thinking on this view? Do you believe that military families or America's veterans will, at large, have a different take on this than the other Americans who we've been talking about and who Congressman Swalwell is appealing to with his buyback program?
Yeah, of course, because we trained on some of these kinds of weapons. Look, every part of my life experience informs this. Being the mayor of a city where the worst part of the job is dealing with violence, we lose as many as were lost at Parkland every 2 or 3 years in my city alone. And this is tearing communities apart. If more guns made us safer, we'd be the safest country on earth. It doesn't work that way. And common sense measures like universal background checks can't seem to get delivered by Washington, even when most Republicans, let alone most Americans, agree it's the right thing to do. And as somebody who trained on weapons of war, I can tell you that there are weapons that have absolutely no place in American cities or neighborhoods in peacetime, ever.
Vice President Biden, 30 seconds.
A real 30 seconds?
A real 30 seconds.
Okay. I'm the only person that's beaten the NRA nationally. I'm the guy that got the Brady bill passed, the background checks, number one. Number two, we increased that background check during the Obama-Biden administration. I'm also the only guy that got assault weapons banned, and the number of clips in a gun banned. And so, folks, look, and I would buy back those weapons. We already started talking about that. We tried to get it done. I think it can be done, and it should be demanded that we do it, and that's a good expenditure of money. And lastly, we should have smart guns. No gun should be able to be sold unless your biometric measure could pull that trigger. It's within our right to do that. We can do that. Our enemy is the gun manufacturers, not the NRA. The gun manufacturer.
Vice President,
but the NRA is taking orders from the gun manufacturer.
Lester Holt has our next question. Lester, take it away.
All right, Chuck. This is a question from our viewers. We put some suggestions that asked maybe they could share some. Here's one that came from Kathleen from Canby, Oregon, who writes, many fear the current administration has inflicted irrevocable harm on our governing institutions and norms, and in the process, on our reputation abroad. The question is, what do you see as important early steps in reversing the damage done? And we'll put this one to Senator Bennett.
Thank you very much. What an excellent question. First of all, we have to restore our democracy at home. The rest of the world is looking for us for leadership. We have a president who doesn't believe in the rule of law. He doesn't believe in freedom of the press. He doesn't believe in independent judiciary. He believes in the corruption that he's brought to Washington, D.C., and that is what we have to change, and that's why everybody is up here tonight, and I appreciate the fact that they're up here for that reason. Second, we've got to restore the relationships that he's destroyed with our allies, not just in Europe. He flew to the G20 last night and attacked Japan, Germany, and a third ally of ours without saying anything about North Korea or Russia. And when you've got a situation where you have a president who says something happened in the Straits of Hormuz and the whole world doesn't know whether to believe it or not, that is a huge problem when it comes to the national security of the United States of America.
This is a perfect
and we
time.
need to change that.
Thank you, Senator Bennett. It's a perfect time for me to do another one of these down the line. And this is what this question is, which is you're likely going to have to reset a relationship between America and another country or entity if you become president perhaps because of some relationship that you just mentioned about President Trump. What is the first relationship you like to reset as president? I'm going to go down the line, and I'll start with Ms. Williamson.
Well, one of my first phone calls would be to call the European leaders and say, we're back. Because I totally understand how important it is that the United States be part of the Western Alliance.
I'm trying to get one or two words here. I hear you. Governor Hickenlooper.
You know, I talk about constant engagement. And I think the first country I would go to, and I understand they've been cheating and stealing intellectual property, would be China. Because if we're going to deal with public health pandemics, if we're going to deal with all the challenges of the globe, we've got to have relationships with everyone.
Mr. Yang, we're trying to squeeze in a couple more things before we go to another break. Mr. Yang.
China, we need to cooperate with them on climate change, AI, and other issues. North Korea.
Thanks for the quickness. Mayor Buttigieg.
We have no idea which of our most important allies he will have pissed off worse between now and then. What we know is that our relationship with the entire world needs to change. And it starts by modeling American values at home.
Okay, Mr. Vice President, I'm trying to be quick.
We know NATO will fall apart if he's elected 4 more years. It's the single most consequential alliance in the history of the United States.
Senator Sanders.
It's not one country. I think it is rebuilding trust in the United Nations and understand that we can solve conflicts without war, but with diplomacy.
Senator Harris.
All the members of the NATO alliance.
Senator Gillibrand.
President Trump is hell-bent on starting a war with Iran. My first act will be to engage Iran to stabilize the Middle East and make sure we do not start an unwanted, never-ending war.
Senator Bennett, quickly.
Our European allies in every Latin American country that's willing to have a conversation about how to deal with the refugee crisis.
And Congressman Swalwell.
My first act in foreign policy, we're breaking up with Russia and making up with NATO.
Thank you all. Thank you all. We have one
That's a good plan.
last question for Vice President Biden tonight. You have made your decades of experience in foreign policy a pillar of your campaign. But when the time came to say yes or no on one of the most consequential foreign policy decisions of the last century, you voted for the Iraq War. You have since said you regret that vote. But why should voters trust your judgment when it comes to making a decision about taking the country to war the next time?
Because once Bush abused that power, what happened was we got elected after that. I made sure the president turned to me and said, Joe, get our combat troops out of Iraq. I was responsible for getting 150,000 combat troops out of Iraq, and my son was one of them. I also think we should not have combat troops in Afghanistan. It's long overdue. It should end. And thirdly, I believe that you're not going to find anybody who has pulled together more of alliances to deal with what is the real stateless threat out there. We cannot go it alone in terms of dealing with terrorism. So I'd eliminate the act that allowed us to go into war and not the AUMF, and make sure that it could only be used for what its intent was, and that is to go after terrorists, but never do it alone. That's why we have to repair our alliances. We put together 65 countries to make sure we dealt with ISIS in Iraq and other places. That's what I would do. That's what I have done, and I know how to do it.
Senator Sanders, 30 seconds.
One of the differences that Joe and I have in our record is Joe voted for that war. I helped lead the opposition to that war, which is a total disaster. Second of all, I helped lead the effort for the first time to utilize the War Powers Act to get the United States out of the Saudi-led intervention in Yemen, which is the most horrific humanitarian disaster on earth. And thirdly, let me be very clear, I will do everything I can to prevent a war with Iran, which would be far worse than disastrous war with Iraq.
Senator Sanders, thank you.
All
right, guys.
Informed consent of the American people.
Good news is you get more time to talk, but I have to sneak in one more break. We will be right back with more debate.
Candidate will have a final chance to make their case to the voters. 45 seconds each. We begin with Congressman Swalwell.
We can't be a forward-looking party if we look to the past for our leadership. I'm a congressman, but also a father of a 2-year-old and an infant. When I'm not changing diapers, I'm changing Washington. Most of the time, the diapers smell better. I went to Congress at 31, and I found a Washington that doesn't work for people like you and me. It's made of the rich and the disconnected. I was the first in my family to go to college and have student loan debt. And so I have led the effort to elect the next generation of members of Congress. And we have a moment to seize. This is a can-do generation. This is the generation that will end climate chaos. This is the generation that will solve student loan debt. And this is the generation that will say enough is enough and end gun violence. This generation demands bold solutions. That's why I'm running for president.
Congressman, thank you.
Ms. Williamson, 45 seconds for your closing
I'm sorry we haven't talked more tonight about how we're going to beat Donald Trump. I have an idea about Donald Trump. Donald Trump is not going to be beaten just by insider politics talk. He's not going to be beaten just by somebody who has plans. He's going to be beaten by somebody who has an idea what this man has done. This man has reached into the psyche of the American people, and he has harnessed fear for political purposes. So, Mr. President, if you're listening, I want you to hear me, please. You have harnessed fear for political purposes, and only love can cast that out. So sir, I have a feeling you know what you're doing. I'm going to harness love for political purposes. I will meet you on that field, and sir, love will win.
Ms. Williamson, thank you.
Senator Bennett.
Thank you. Thank you. My mom and her parents came to the United States to rebuild their shattered lives. In the only country that they could. 300 years before that, my parents' family came searching religious freedom here. The ability for one generation to do better than the next is now severely at risk in the United States, especially among children living in poverty like the ones I used to work for in the Denver public schools. That's why I'm running for president. I've had 2 tough races in Colorado by bringing people together, not by making empty promises. And I believe we need to build a broad coalition of Americans to beat Donald Trump, end the corruption in Washington, and build a new era of American democracy and American opportunity. This is going to be hard to do, but it's what our parents would have expected. It's what our kids deserve. I hope you'll join me in this effort. Thank you.
Thank you.
Governor Hickenlooper.
I'm a small business owner who brought that same scrappy spirit to make Colorado one of the most progressive states in America. We expanded reproductive health to reduce teenage abortion by 64%. We were the first state to legalize marijuana, and we transformed our justice system in the process. We passed universal background checks in a purple state. We got to near universal health care coverage. We attacked climate change with the toughest methane regulations in the country, and for the last 3 years, we've been the #1 economy in America. You don't need big government to do big things. I know that because I'm the one person up here who's actually done the big progressive things everyone else is talking about. If we turn towards socialism, we run the risk of helping to re-elect the worst president in American history.
Thank you, Governor.
Senator Gillibrand, you have the floor for 45 seconds.
Women in America are on fire. We've marched, we've organized, we've run for office, and we've won. But our rights are under attack like never before by President Trump and the Republicans who want to repeal Roe v. Wade, which is why I went to the front lines in Georgia to fight for them. As president, I will take on the fights that no one else will. I stood up to the Pentagon and repealed Don't Ask, Don't Tell. I've stood up to the banks and voted against the bailout twice. I've stood up to Trump more than any other senator in the U.S. Senate. And I have the most comprehensive approach for getting money out of politics with publicly funded elections to deal with political corruption. Now is not the time to play it safe. Now is not the time to be afraid of firsts. We need a president who will take on the big challenges, even if she stands alone. Join me in fighting for this.
Senator Gillibrand, thank you.
Mr. Yang, you have 45 seconds for your closing.
First, I want to thank everyone who put me on this stage tonight. I am proof that our democracy still works. Democrats and Americans around the country have one question for their nominee, and that is who can beat Donald Trump in 2020? That is the right question. And the right candidate to beat Donald Trump will be solving the problems that got Donald Trump elected and will have a vision of a trickle-up economy that is already drawing thousands of disaffected Trump voters, conservatives, independents, and libertarians, as well as Democrats and progressives. I am that candidate. I can build a much broader coalition to beat Donald Trump. It is not left. It is not right. It is forward. And that is where I'll take the country in 2020.
Mr. Yang, thank you.
Senator Harris, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, I just want to leave you with a couple of things. One, we need a nominee who has the ability to prosecute the case against 4 more years of Donald Trump, and I will do that. Second, this election is about you. This is about your hopes and your dreams and your fears and what wakes you up at 3 o'clock in the morning. And that's why I have what I call a 3 a.m. agenda. That is about everything from what we need to do to deliver health care to how you will be able to pay the bills by the end of the month. And when I think about what our country needs, I promise you, I will be a president who leads with a sense of dignity, with honesty, speaking the truth, and giving the American family all that they need to get through the end of the month in a way that allows them to prosper. So I hope to earn your support. Please join us at KamalaHarris.org.
Senator, thank you.
Mayor Buttigieg, 45 seconds.
Nothing about politics is theoretical for me. I've had the experience of writing a letter to my family, putting it in an envelope marked just in case, and leaving it where they would know where to find it in case I didn't come back from Afghanistan. I have the experience of being in a marriage that exists by the grace of a single vote on the U.S. Supreme Court. I have the experience of guiding a community where the per capita income was below $20,000 when I took office into a brighter future. I'm running because the decisions we make in the next 3 or 4 years are going to decide how the next 30 or 40 go. And when I get to the current age of the current president in the year 2055, I want to be able to look back on these years and say my generation delivered climate solutions, racial equality, and an end to endless war. help me deliver that new generation to Washington before it's too late.
Thank you.
Senator Sanders, 45 seconds, the floor is yours.
I suspect people all over the country who are watching this debate are saying, these are good people, they have great ideas. But how come nothing really changes? How come for the last 45 years wages have been stagnant for the middle class? How come we have the highest rate of childhood poverty? How come 45 million people still have student debt? How come 3 people own more wealth than the bottom half of America? And here is the answer. Nothing will change unless we have the guts to take on Wall Street, the insurance industry, the pharmaceutical industry, the military-industrial complex, and the fossil fuel industry. If we don't have the guts to take them on, we'll continue to have plans, we'll continue to have talk, and the rich will get richer, and everybody else will be struggling.
Thank you, Senator.
And lastly, we'll hear from Vice President Biden. Sir, you have 45 seconds.
Thank you very much. I'm running to lead this country because I think it's important we restore the soul of this nation. This president has ripped it out. It's the only president in our history who has equated racist and white supremacist with ordinary and decent people. He's the only president who has engaged and embraced dictators and thumbed their nose at our allies. I'm secondly running for president because I think we have to restore the backbone of America, the poor and hardworking middle-class people. You can't do that without replacing them with the dignity they once had. Lastly, we got to unite the United States of America as much as anybody says we can. If we do, there's not a single thing the American people can't do. This is the United States of America. We can do anything if we're together. So God bless you all, and may God protect our troops.
Vice President Biden, thank you.
We want to thank our candidates. We've had 2 nights of spirited debate on a range of issues, 20 candidates in all. We want to thank all of the candidates last night.
Seriously, it takes guts to run and stick your neck out like this to you guys and to the 10 last night. Thanks for having the guts to do this.
I would also like to thank the audience for completely ignoring our suggestion not to react. We made it a lot more fun.
Also, thanks to the Democratic National Committee and the Florida Democratic Party.
And, of course, thank you to everyone at the Adrienne R. Center for hosting us here and our terrific audiences. Chuck mentioned.
Over terrific.
For Savannah, Jose, Chuck, and Rachel, I'm Lester Holt. Good night, everyone, from Miami.
What a debate tonight. Good evening. I'm Morgan Radford, and welcome back to our special coverage of the second night of the first Democratic debates of the 2020 election cycle right here on NBC News Now. There you have it. 2 nights, 20 candidates. The candidates are walking off the stage as we speak. Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders, Kamala Harris, Pete Buttigieg were in the front. They were the front runners coming into tonight. But there were also a number of people on stage who wanted to make a name for themselves, and they did come out swinging. They talked about race, immigration, police violence, healthcare, climate change, gun control, just to name a few. And those candidates tried to stake their claim on the issues. Many of them also tried to introduce themselves to some Americans who were meeting them tonight for the first time. Here are some of the highlights.
We think it is time for change, real change.
I was 6 years old when a presidential candidate came to the California Democratic Convention and said, it's time to pass the torch to a new generation of Americans. That candidate was then Senator Joe Biden. Joe Biden was right when he said it was time to pass the torch to a new generation of Americans 32 years ago. He's still right today.
Hey guys, you know what? America does not want to witness a food fight. They want to know how we're going to put food on their table. Yes?
Raise your hand if your government plan would provide coverage for undocumented immigrants.
Ladies and gentlemen, we don't have a health care system in the United States. We have a sickness care system in the United States.
And I will ensure that this microphone that the President of the United States holds in her hand is used in a way that is about reflecting the values of our country.
For a party that associates itself with Christianity, to say that it is okay to suggest that God would smile on the division of families at the hands of federal agents, that God would condone putting children in cages, has lost all claim to ever use religious language again.
If you forcibly take a child from their parents' arms, you are kidnapping them.
With sophisticated 21st century border security, not a medieval wall. And the president has turned the border of the United States into a symbol of nativist hostility that the whole world is looking at, when what we should be represented by is the Statue of Liberty, which has brought my parents to this country to begin with. We need to make a change.
I am determined to bring about a day when a white person driving a vehicle and a black person driving a vehicle, when they see a police officer approaching, feels the exact same thing.
We're going to get to you. Hang on. We're going to get to you.
Stage, I would like to speak on the issue of race. And I'm going to now direct this at Vice President Biden. I do not believe you are a racist. And I agree with you when you commit yourself to the importance of finding common ground. But I also believe, and it's personal, and I was actually it was hurtful to hear you talk about the reputations of two United States senators who built their reputations and career on the segregation of race in this country.
It's a mischaracterization of my position across the board. I did not praise racist.
Do you agree today that you were wrong to oppose busing in America then?
No.
Do you agree?
I did not oppose busing in America. What I opposed is busing ordered by the Department of Education. That's what I opposed.
Well, there was a failure of states to integrate public schools in America. I was part of the second class to integrate Berkeley, California public schools almost 2 decades after Brown v. Board of Education.
Because your city council made that decision. It was a local